Welcome to Wizards Institute, the #1 community to learn smart investing and financial independence.
Software and tech analyst Dan Ives of Wedbush is a long-term bull on Tesla. He has correctly predicted Tesla's rise for years, with a current price target of $2,000. Dan is ranked impressively 236 out of almost 7,000 analysts on TipRank, with an average 12.5% return per rating. In this interview, we will not labor over stock price, but rather discuss the fundamental story of Tesla. Bulls believe Tesla is much more than a car company. It's the Apple of transport and energy and has built high moat with potential synergistic markets in multiple areas.
Okay, great. We're excited to have Dan Ives with us today, one of my big fans. He is a top-ranked technology and software analyst, a longtime Tesla bull. And today we have him for a good 45 hours to really discuss the fundamental bull case for Tesla, at least with Dan's views. And we have 4 or 5 areas we want to cover that I pre-agree with Dan. But Dan, perhaps if you don't mind, just like a minute or two on your background, and then maybe a few minutes on, for the folks that are not as familiar with Tesla and yourself, your pitch on Tesla, and then I'll dive into deeper for each of these key areas.
Sure. Yeah. So I've covered tech on Wall Street for over 20 years. And in covering that, it started off in .com, boom and bust, and obviously covering, call it 75, 80 public vendors, dealing with many private vendors, and really went from software to broader technology, ultimately to EV and more disruptive technology. And that's why when you look at Tesla, I view Tesla, and I think many on the street do, as a technology stock. I don't view it as an automaker given the EV market. And that's why if it was something where I always felt like I was going to cover Tesla in that view from a multiple perspective in terms of how I was going to value it, similar to how I viewed Apple in terms of covering Apple, even more on the software side than a traditional hardware analyst. And I think for me, I tend to view things forest through the trees. I don't get caught up in quarter to quarter, more or less, especially with some of these secular growth names. And for a name like Tesla, that's kind of how I view it. I view it as that you have to look at this over the next decade. What can it do?
Yeah, and so per our early discussion is that's exactly how we want to look at it. Let's not talk about a day-to-day price. If they want that, they could just Google your name, and there's a lot of talking heads with you giving good comments about the price. Let's talk about 10 years. Again, we talked about a few areas. Let's talk about products, right? So 10 years from now, Dan, what do you see as Tesla's scope of products, scope and breadth of products, not just in transport, but the whole spectrum? There's just so much out there, whether it is buses or the semi or the roadster, obviously the solar. Where do you see the rollout, and how do you see the product mix 10 years from now?
Sure. So first off, right now, from an investor perspective, and even how I view it, it's pure auto. I would say the market assigns no value to solar or any of the other called moonshot projects that Musk and Fremont are working on. When I look out over the next decade, it's really replicating Model 3 success. And you're going to need to do that with Model Y, with semis, with Cybertruck. And then ultimately, when you look at autonomous, self-driving and the FSD, that's going to be important because right now, and we've spent a lot of time on autonomous in terms of trying to value that. Because of course, Waymo's at the top, but then you got Tesla, of course, Uber and others. That's going to be the next sort of growth frontier on the other side. This is we go into robo-taxis and call it 2025, 2026 and beyond. But for right now, if I look at the next 2-3 years, it's Model 3 success, especially in China, which I believe that continues to be the linchpin worth $400 a share. Model Y success, Cybertruck, we believe 700,000 pre-orders right now. And then you start to deal with the semis. So That's how we get to 1 million deliveries by 2022, 2023 when we look at Tesla.
Okay, so there's a lot of rumors, and they may be rumors, but perhaps you have insider about the compact in China. There is supposedly some work being done designing out of Berlin for the European market. Somebody on the internet was talking about a EV/AV bus that's all, that might go through the boring tunnel. The products that are being talked about are tremendous, right? So beyond the ones that you just said, do you see, again, on the 10-year view, do you have any knowledge that there will be other products that are already being developed or in the works?
Well, I think
Mhm.
at any time, very similar as Apple, they're working on anywhere from 5 to 10 plus major initiatives. And I'd say it's possible 70, 80% of them never see the light of day. Because this is really on the other side over the next 4, 5, 6 years, what Musk and what Tesla's trying to build out. Look, I think right now, over the next 12 to 18 months, and what really could be longer term is the 1 million mile battery. I can tell you right now, within Fremont, within Giga 3 in Shanghai, all the efforts right now is around, this will be announced a battery day in September. It's a 1 million mile battery, which we believe gets announced. And we also think the $100 kilowatt per hour, can you get below that threshold? Because the reason that's key, because everything else that you talk about, it all comes down to the same nucleus. All these other, when we talk about boring tunnel and just any of the other initiatives and some of the futuristic, it all comes down to battery technology. And that continues to be, along with the brand, the massive moat that they've built versus competitors.
Okay, I'm glad you brought that up. I mentioned to you, I had a good hour, almost hour and a half session yesterday with a famous bear, Gordon Johnson, and we went back and forth on batteries, because batteries obviously are the most expensive part of the car right now. And Gordon, like many bears, contend that there is no technology that Tesla has that really belongs to CATL, Panasonic, or LG. Can you talk about that? Because obviously that ties into the cost and whether or not we eventually become cheaper or comparable to ICE vehicles.
Yeah, I think that's a common bear argument. And I can tell you, institutionally speaking, as well as from a retail perspective, right? That continues to be the big bear argument. And the one thing I'd also say is that the bears in Tesla, they're not just, fly over the story type bears. They've done a lot of work. And I talked to some of the smartest people in the story are not just the bulls, but the bears. And actually, I learned from that as well. And I think
sure,
a name like this, you always have to understand all the opinions. I think when it comes to, I disagree from a battery technology that it's not Tesla. As someone like myself that spent, a lot of time over the years researching this, spending time in Giga throughout Europe, China, throughout Asia, to really trying to understand the competitive advantage. I do believe Tesla, from a battery technology perspective and from an efficiency, especially out of Giga in Nevada, that's where they started to build the moat. And that's something that they've replicated at Giga 3 in Shanghai. Which right now, if you said to me, what are the main competitive advantages of Tesla? Battery technology out of Giga in Nevada and of course, out of Giga 3 in Shanghai, as well as the brand. Now, to that argument, in terms of the battery technology is not there. Eventually, GM, Fisker, domestic, European competitors, Chinese, they're just going to further and further go after Tesla competitively, and that advantage is going to be lost. That was the argument a year and a half ago to where we are today. So I'm just saying that it's one where that will continue to be a prove me for Tesla. But that's also why September 22nd, Battery Day, in my opinion, will be a seminal moment for the Tesla story over the next decade.
So maybe just unpack that a bit more. When you say battery technology, Dan, are you saying, is there a certain type of hardware that Tesla is developing, or is it mainly the software in terms of how they manage the cells, as they seem to have done with the Model S?
It's the
What
software.
is
Yeah.
it's
I mean,
okay? So the hardware
yeah.
is from the suppliers in China and Korea, which can be supplied to other EV makers. But what Tesla has is the software that manages the cells better. Is that, again? I'm not a technologist. Can you explain
Sure,
that?
and there's a component of the hardware. I don't view it. I view it as a blended way that they've kind of taken battery technology, and of course they have suppliers, Panasonic, which is a huge one, but they've perfected the process with their own proprietary piece. And this is the part that people argue they don't have a proprietary piece, which I disagree with. If you look at battery technology, they take batteries, and they're able to basically, through their own process, in my opinion, and you see it in terms of what they get from, from the miles per charge and what they get on these cars. All these other competitors come out, and how do they compare versus Tesla from a miles perspective? It's not even comparison. How do they compare from a cost comparison? Not even. And then at the same point, just to put a bow around the whole story, now you have profitability.
Yeah.
And see, that's the
Yeah.
key to the story, in my opinion. Now that they could do it profitably.
Sure. Yeah, I think there's a lot of news out there that none of the competitors are even matching consistently the Model S from 7 years ago, right?
Exactly.
And the miles gap actually is increasing as far as I can see. Although again, Gordon had mentioned that maybe there's some mistakes with the EPA ratings, but I'll go with the EPA ratings. But again, so just I'm on the same page here. So the CATLs, Panasonics, and LGs are providing the battery hardware components. Tesla does something with that hardware, and they do a lot more with the software to give the advantage. Is that the position is that what I'm hearing?
And that's all under the hood.
Okay.
Within Giga, within Fremont.
Yeah.
And that continues to be, they have an advantage, okay, which continues to be in their playbook that no one else can do, that they basically have, at this point, perfected to a point where from a competition perspective, they own 80-90% of the market. And I just want to just hit on one point. For many years, if I go back a decade, and with institutional investors, you'd give your bull pitch on Apple. The bears would be like, it's hardware. It can be replicated. What's the advantage?
I get it.
Okay, well,
yeah.
So I just want to make that comparison to what Apple's done from a smartphone perspective, to what Tesla's doing on a battery perspective, from an EV perspective. That's why I view it's essentially an Amazonization, or it's an Appleization of the EV market in terms of how I view what Musk and Fremont have done.
Got it. So when we hear that CATL has already announced a million plus battery and is offering it at a 10% premium to anybody that wants to buy it, how is that different than what Tesla is doing and will announce in September?
When I think those are all the details that investors want to hear. It comes down to right now the Tesla battery today is 500,000, and it's going to be double that over the coming years. And I think one of the big things I'll talk about at Battery Day is really taking some of those data points talked about from a 1,000,000-mile battery and now actually putting it to real use for an average consumer when they're looking to buy a car, whether it's traditional or an EV. That's going to be key to the price parity when it comes to the battery technology. And
okay.
I think right now you're asking great questions, and I don't have all the answers. If I did, that continues to sort of be the question marks going into Battery Day. And that's why, like I've talked about, the bull case in Tesla to get there, you have to believe the China story, and you got to believe what's happening on battery technology.
Sure.
And
Sure.
because then that's going to be just another step to the story.
Okay. Yeah, I personally see 3 or 4 key categories of moats. One of them is the battery tech, which at some point, I'd love to hear views. The cost per mile will drop to comparable to ICE. That's one. And again, when is that? And then once it gets to, I think the S is at 400. The Cybertruck tri-motor I order is at 500. Once you get to 400, 500, it just becomes so much easier to drive, even without a lot of superchargers, right?
Sure.
So to me, that is a critical part of making this cost and range, so that adoption becomes much easier and making ICE more and more obsolete. Can you kind of just wrap up with that?
Let me
In
ask
terms
you a
of
question. Did you pre-order a Cybertruck?
I pre-order more than one, my friend.
Nice.
Well, he's brilliant because of the FSD, right? So it's almost like a cheap, it's a free option.
Yep. And,
right?
and yeah, no, exactly. And
Which I mean, at the downside, I know many friends that have ordered multiple Cybertrucks, so that 75,000 whatever number has been ordered,
700,000, yeah,
is not necessarily real, because I may not follow through.
We're only factoring in a 30% conversion of the 700,000. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I place orders for each of the motors with the view that, I'll end up with one or two, one for my relative. It's just an amazing product. Okay, so to wrap up that, when do you see the convergence or the break even in terms of the parity cost with ICE?
I think you're gonna start to see that over the next 2-3 years.
Okay.
And I think that's a linchpin to the bull story when you start to cross that chasm. And I think you could start to see that in the next 2 to 3 years.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's helpful. The other moat is the software, that, in particular the autonomous, which Kathy Wood and many others like yourself have really spawned an amazing frenzy around the future of TAS, transport as a service, but obviously the Uber killer, the Lyft killer. Yeah, tell us your views on that. What's real and what's rumor.
Yeah, and we've done a lot of work, and I have some reports that we've done, for anyone that's interested in terms of autonomous. I mean, my team spent a ton of time interviewing every major autonomous player, a lot of private, those that invest in the space, different demos on the freight side as well. Look, I believe in autonomous right now. I mean, you got Waymo, but in my view, Tesla, and of course Uber, but I think they're going to have to pair back. Tesla's number 2. And I believe, now, of course, a lot of it's going to be regulatory, but I believe as we start to get into 2025, that's our view, that you're going to start to, there's different phases of autonomous, but to me, that's when this is going to take a whole new story and a turn as you start to get into within the window from 2025 to 2030 of a fully autonomous vehicle. And that's why, a lot of times I'll get arguments from investors. And I can tell you, this is the most emotional bull bear story I've ever covered. Okay, in all those 20 years. And many will be like, okay, what do you have to give them credit that they're going to be able to do? Look, it's no different than where was Amazon when you go back 10 years ago.
Yeah, I get that. I totally get that.
But I think the autonomous piece is key to the next phase of the story.
So did you say Waymo is ahead?
Oh, in my view, I view Waymo and autonomous as ahead.
How's that possible? They're using the LiDAR, right?
Yeah. So right now,
how's that possible given so much data that Tesla is collecting? I mean, it's like supposedly 1 or 2% of.
I view it from an investment perspective. So
yeah.
Today, the amount that Waymo's invested in autonomous versus Tesla if you say to me in the next 2 to 3 years, who do I think's at the top of the heap? It's Tesla, because it's transportation as a service. In other words, I view Tesla right now, the thing that's not factored into the stock is that autonomous piece. I do not believe the street gives really, any major credit to them being the number one player in autonomous.
It makes no sense to me. Forbes just came out today, and again, I discussed this with Gordon. He didn't believe the numbers, but Forbes just quoted that 57% of Tesla owners, new or old, have bought some kind of software upgrade, FSD, right?
Yeah, and
that's an incredible number to me. That's an incredible number to me.
I would separate it out. Yeah, and I would separate it out, like, in terms of FSD, and obviously that's a huge piece to the profitability, and 10 to 12,000 basically goes right to the bottom line in terms of that software component. When I'm talking about autonomous, I'm talking about future fully autonomous in terms of when you look out for the next decade. So right now, of course, FSD, Tesla's the only game in town, but ultimately when I view it down the road, that's going to be another key part of the story for Tesla as they own the autonomous and eventually robo-taxis in the next step. But the one thing I want to point out, which is important, is that I do not believe, I could tell you if I talk to 10 investors today on Tesla, not one of them gives them credit from a stock perspective for that piece. And I think that's another leg to the stool.
Okay, two more questions on the software. That do you have a view on the technology? Again, I hear a lot that LiDAR is not the way to go. What Tesla is doing, I'm not sure exactly what you call Tesla's software, but obviously the AI there, the data collection part is going to win out. Do you have a view on whether or not one tech or one platform is better?
I view Tesla's. I mean, that's our view. I mean, I view it's a pot of gold in terms of what they've done from a software perspective, and in terms of their, their proprietary way to navigate this extremely complex area. I view it as right now it's their world and everyone else is paying rent.
Okay. Do we need to have 100% FSD, whatever that means, accuracy, before autonomous or semi-autonomous becomes a big deal? As an example, China might say, listen, there's a 6-lane highway between Shanghai and Beijing, right? Let's just designate this the AV EV lane. And as of today, Teslas can navigate it most of the way, right? Even with what I'm using today, my X and autopilot, I feel like I would be comfortable getting in. Now you have to kind of navigate potentially in and out of the highways, but as of today, why do we need to wait? Why? I think Kathy Wood has said similar that Tesla should roll out sort of the partial for certain situations. If that's the case, and if you agree with it, then it's going to happen a lot sooner than what people are saying.
Yeah, I agree with Kathy there. It's just regulatory. Regulatory continues to be a bit of the robot. When you talk about the 100% FSD, to get to where we believe, I do believe Tesla is going to be there much sooner than anyone expects. It just comes down to regulatory. And when I was in Asia in January, pre-COVID, that was a big area that we were researching. And I do believe what you're saying, especially in China, I think this is something that's going to come a lot quicker than anyone's expecting. And that's why, why, like, when I look at technology overall, just take a broader view of everything happening from streaming to cloud. In my opinion, this is the area over the next decade that could change the whole paradigm.
Okay, so let's say it does happen, FSD, some form or the other, whether it's 2 years from now or 10 years from now, Dan, what kind of world are we in? Is the car now as a service? It's basically a service now. Will people stop buying cars? What does this new world look like? What happens when FSD or some form of FSD happens?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that's a big variable because we've tried to model that out over the next decade in terms of,
Yeah.
because of course it's like, a lot of it comes down to like, I think freight and semis are
Okay.
probably, from a case study perspective, those are probably the first ones. The ROI there is just massive. So when you talk about areas that you can monetize, I think you can see a much more significant ramp on that first. Then it's going to be monetization. You talk about robo taxis and everywhere Tesla wants to go. I mean, that's something where you could start to see 5 to 10% penetration, once that starts to, at least from a regulatory perspective, get rolled out. But that's why right now, regulatory, and we're not just seeing in the US, in China, in some ways, they've even gone ahead in some areas from a testing perspective in terms of different types of road tests and different, especially private companies that we've talked to there and some of the investments. And I think that's something that's going to ramp here with obviously Tesla leading that.
Okay. Yeah, it could happen whether it's China or Dubai, one of those places that are building a brand new city. Is very, very government centric. And then once one of those two cities show it working, it becomes much easier to adapt, right? It doesn't have to be the US.
And China in particular, I think, is well ahead. And that's also why, if you look at Tesla, given their tentacles with Giga 3 in Shanghai, and I think that's something that, not just from a battery perspective, but from an autonomous, you're going to see more and more work done out of China from a Tesla perspective.
So being Chinese, I think the issue with Tesla in China is Tesla is not Chinese. So at some point, that will eventually, I believe, become an issue.
But just to that point, because as much as you talk about bears, I think an area that many missed for Tesla was that view. In other words, was the view of like, Tesla's not Chinese, not a Chinese company, US, Giga 3, that they're never going to build it. Okay, then what happened? Giga 3 got built. In my opinion, it's probably the most next-gen factory that I've ever seen from an auto perspective.
Yep.
Okay, demand, domestic competitors, it's not going to gain traction. It's going to be 150,000 units first year out. So the one thing I just want to point out, it's good that you brought that up, because that continues to be a theme in Tesla. Doubt them, they'll prove you wrong. And at least to date, where we are sitting today, that's sort of been the narrative.
Yeah, again, having ran my own fund in China, I think, given how strategic transport and energy is as a sector, I can't see any country letting one foreign company, whether it's Chinese, Indian, or European, totally dominate. So we'll see, because it's still early days. It's still early days.
Very early.
So we won't know. We won't know. Let's talk about competition. 4%
penetrated, EV.
Yeah, and I'm sure they're learning from Tesla, right? So there's a lot there. Competition. Any incumbents have any shot? If not, which upstarts? There's quite a few of them.
Well, I think what GM's doing from a battery technology perspective is significant. I mean, the billions that they plan to pour in, and they've kind of dove into the deep end of the pool from a battery. So in the US, I think what GM's doing is significant. And I think that is something, especially if US market slowed for Tesla significantly. I think the bigger competition is, of course, in Europe. I mean, if you look, especially Porsche, Volkswagen, others, Audi, everything they've done. And that's also why it's so important that they build that factory in Berlin in terms of the next factory for Tesla, in terms of just another sort of, another pole in the sand for them. And of course, China, major domestic competitors. But I'll just give you some interesting anecdotes. 2 years ago in Norway, which I view EV capital of the world, the view of Tesla, very negative. I mean, of course, very domestic there. And really, what I view as a market that's years ahead of any other. I'd say 6 months ago, much more bullish. Now, of course, that's Tesla now having much more penetration in Europe, over the last year. But I think it just shows many went from, domestic to the Tesla brand is something they want. And that's another major competitive advantage for a company that doesn't advertise. That brand, the Musk DNA, is a huge competitive advantage.
Okay, so you do see other players, and quite a few players, with emerging comparable battery and technologies to compete, which is fine. It's a huge market. Tesla only needs 10% to meet most of the bullish targets. When the range gets to 400 or 500, whether it's Teslas or others, is the moat of the charging system, is that less necessary?
That's a good point.
Is that still a moat? Like, for example, Porsche, the Taycan supposedly is a great car, but where do you charge it if you bought it in the States?
Supercharger network continues to be, a major competitive advantage. But to that point, I still view it as a moat. But I think that goes to the bear argument, is that eventually competitors further and further encroach. They build out their own sort of semi-supercharger networks. And eventually Tesla's competitive advantage starts to narrow. And that could happen. Look, and that's why right now, Tesla, it's a fork in the road situation for them to prove, as competitors continue to come on, that they could, go above and beyond.
How does an incumbent, or especially a challenger, unless they come out with 300-400 mile pretty quickly with scale, how do you compete against Tesla's higher range and this, 15,000, 20,000 charging network right now? How do you compete against that? I mean, it's this whole chicken egg thing. How do you, unless somebody came out with a 500, right? With a 400 or 500 mile range, which case you don't need it as readily. But how does, who in your view is coming out with a product that is going to be at least comparable in price and range and sexiness to a Tesla, and be able to have charging? Who do you see as that main player? Now, China, I see a few names potentially, right? But outside of China, who would it be?
Outside of China, I don't see it today.
If you had to pick one, is it VW?
Look, if I had to pick one, and I'm not going to call it a stretch, but it would be VW if there's one. That's the one. But to what you even talked about, China, you could go to domestic competitors that are going to give them a huge run for their money.
They'll build it. China will build it. China will absolutely build it. Yeah.
But when you look at US and Europe, I mean, Volkswagen is the only one that's close.
Listen, I'm not a smart guy, right? You're much smarter. How do investors jack up the Nikolas and Rivians of the world when they may or may not have anything close to that range, but there's no network? How does that work? I mean, it's such a basic question to me.
Sure. So
can you explain that?
I will.
I'm not following that logic there from an investor standpoint for these upstarts.
Sure. And I will explain it from my conversations. And look, right now, as an investor, institutional, okay, you're trying to play the EV market. Scarcity, right? Which speaks to Tesla stock. When a Nikola and others that have come through have what looks like, whether it's hydrogen or fuel cells or the Badger or whatever it may be, or Fisker, have a technology that potentially could start to dent Tesla's market share, whether it's on semis or pickup. The scarcity of names out there, you could count on one hand. So any name that comes through that has some sort of technology that looks like it's a moat, a mini moat, investors are going to pay up for. That's how all of a sudden you see some of these valuate. Now, just comparing it maybe even to 99, 2000 dot-com bubble and burst. The difference here is that with a lot of these, when we've seen it, there is that core technology, as we've seen with Tesla. But it comes down to, they have to execute. If they don't, then investors run for the exits. But it at least speaks to the euphoria around some of these names. Not saying it's justified, just to at least take you into the psychology there. And a Rivian in terms of some of those investments and what that round was.
So I didn't dig into any of these in detail. Have any of these upstarts addressed this question of charging?
Not ones that are concrete.
Okay.
And
I'm really surprised. I'm really surprised. I just thought, I haven't dug into. I spent more time with Tesla, but I'm just seeing these valuations and announcements. Unless they come up with.
And you only have prototypes too.
Yeah, but even if I believe that they're 300-400 miles, which I don't, who would buy it unless there's a infrastructure set up for charging, right?
And that's why when I get into very when I talk to people a lot smarter than me, like you, and they talk about how Tesla's demise, and these are super smart people. I don't see it. I'm not saying that they're necessarily wrong. I just don't see it, given the supercharger, given the moat, and given I haven't seen anyone else that's come out with a concrete way that's going to put a major dent in Tesla's market position.
If you were wrong in your fundamental long call, what would it be?
Sure. So let me go. I'll say there's probably three areas. If we were wrong, that would be the most concerning. One would be China. I think China's worth $400 per share. So if they're not able to ramp China to what's called 250, 300,000 deliveries per year when it gets to steady state, domestic competitors, regulatory within the country, as you said, they're getting too big. And that market actually does not get to the point that we believe, that would be a huge negative. That would be one. Two would be the battery technology. They don't announce a 1,000,000-mile battery. Competitors start to encroach. Ultimately, the market share starts to loosen a bit, and that would be two. And then three would be, given all those factors, they're not able to do it profitably, sustainably. And I think that would be the trifecta of bearishness, how we could be wrong if those don't materialize.
What about key man risk?
Yeah, look, you mean in terms of like Musk leaving Tesla
unfortunately getting sick, moving on to Mars, just this talk of everything. I'm just curious how.
Look, it's been there's always been concerns with a lot of revolving doors out of Fremont, more and more people that have left, just given key man risk with Musk. And look, you could argue it was the same thing with Apple with Jobs. Or I'd say at one point it was Gates at Microsoft. So that always is a risk. But look, remember, Musk continues to be the hearts and lungs of the Tesla story. Tesla's not who it is without Musk. So that's always, there's always a broader risk out there. But the one thing I will tell you is that I've started to see less movement out of the executive chamber in Tesla. The engineering, the bench they have below there is extremely strong. And I do think that he is heavily vested in the Tesla story, despite SpaceX and as well as a lot of the other initiatives.
Okay. Let me just check the time. I know you've got a tight schedule. Okay. Yeah, I've got a few minutes. Can we talk about solar and the home? It makes sense to me, but nobody seems to talk about it.
No.
In terms of it's been a while, but it seems like this year the product is there, the pricing is there, it's featured on the website now. Do you have a price on that? Do you have a look for that? And so when I'm talking about not just the roofs, but obviously the power wall, and then eventually moving to HVAC, and essentially owning the whole smart home or energy systems of the home. Is that something that is a big thing eventually? No.
Yeah, I mean, if it is, it would be incremental. I'd say it's been the biggest disappointment in the Tesla story has been the solar component, the acquisition, Solar City. You know, if you just look, like that's been definitely a sore spot of investors from a solar perspective. Now, obviously, it comes down to, do you put good money after bad? That's going to be a continued investment profile. But I tell you right now, we assign minimal, if any, value to that franchise.
Okay. Again, is that just a haven't gotten around to it, or just so small right now, or do you?
I think it's been disappointing in terms of the performance.
Okay.
I think the acquisition history has been more of a negative, rather than a positive. Of course, there's tax implications and other. And it's something where right now, if Tesla had $1 of investment, I would rather that dollar, or as an investor,
go to transport. Yeah.
Because I view it as, if it goes over there, are you getting $1.50, $2, $4 return on the dollar, or are you putting in $1 and you're getting 50 cents, or 10 cents or zero?
Okay. Anything else that's not quite public yet, that might be a surprise for us? Anything?
Look, I mean, to me, the biggest thing that I'm super excited about is Battery Day, because I keep getting back to Battery Day because I view it that if we look out 3, 4, 5 years from now, we will go back to what they're doing in China, and Battery Day as the start of what I view as the next competitive moat, or further competitive moat, in terms of the announcements there. And I think that's why they've continued to push that out, of course, with COVID delayed. But I think from a technology perspective, I think that's where they're really going to take investors under the hood of some of their next innovations.
But the street and almost everything I read, it's almost a foregone conclusion that Q2 is profitable, right? I mean, they sucked like over $1.5 billion out of software sales. I mean, I upgraded my X to FSD, right? That's free money for them. And
they thank you for it.
Yes, and I'm sure I'll thank them too. But in terms of battery, is there even any controversy that they will make this million? It seems to me it's a foregone conclusion, right? So why? I mean, so it's just, I think they're waiting for the Austin versus Tulsa before they announce it, I think, right? But it's almost like I believe that it's going to happen, right? So, but you seem to think there's more coming out of it than I'm reading into it.
Yeah, and I think that would be the headline, but I think there's going to be a lot of other battery innovations that they potentially could announce. That what we've talked about, a big point here, that you're going to leave Battery Day feeling that competitive issue, they just continue to be further and further ahead. And I think some of that is, I think those are going to be key announcements at the Battery Day.
Okay. Dan, last question. In 10 years from now, 2030, who's bigger in terms of valuation, revenue, Tesla versus the Amazons and Apples of the world, and why?
Yeah, I mean, I still view Apple and Amazon would be, from a valuation perspective, just given what we're talking about in terms of e-commerce, smartphone. But when you look out 10 years from now, I mean, that's where Tesla has potential to join that next class when we start to get to, what could be over 500 billion and some of these other metrics, as they kind of execute on the strategy. And if they're able to perfect autonomous to the point that I believe they can, then I think the story takes a whole nother level.
Gotcha. Great. Okay. I know you've got another meeting, so I'm going to let you go, but this has been a
No,
fantastic
this
learning
is great.
session.
Thanks,
I
and
really,
thanks for
really
everyone that came
appreciate it,
on
Dan.
too. And thanks for
Sure.
having me. I appreciate it.
Okay, Dan. Thank you. Have a
Take
good
care.
day.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us. Please visit Wizards Institute to access the blog summary of today's session, to learn more about other speakers, and to network with other investment wizards. Wizards Institute, the #1 community to learn smart investing and financial freedom.